We're reading on David Thoreau, A Life. Thoreau was smart. He had his hut in the woods at Walden. It was only like a mile walk to Concord. He could walk home, and he didn't have to drive his car. He could walk home and have dinner with Mom on Sunday nights and still live in the hut in Walden Pond and get away from his family. But so he didn't have to commute. He didn't use the railroad. Anyways, we're reading on page 203 of Walden. Is it you? It says, worse yet was that other obvious essential food. He needed food. Planting beans was Thoreau's way of teaching a basic fact forgotten by virtually the whole of philosophy. Plant life or plant-based. Plant life is the foundation of all human intellection. Intellection. What's intellection? We'll repeat that. Worse yet was the other obvious essential. He was living essentially. Planting beans was Thoreau's way of teaching a basic fact forgotten by virtually the whole of philosophy. Plant life is the foundation of all human intellection.
So that's why some people say that because the philosophers they didn't think of
what?
They died from hunger because they just didn't know anything about
food. Well, we're reading about plant-based diet in Thoreau.
Philosophy was planted with food.
Confronting this fact meant entangling himself with 7 tedious miles of beans and their many associates, starting with the brace of oxen whose strength he needed to break open the hard soil, and a man to drive the oxen and provide the plow. It also meant acquiring the seed to plant, hoping for rain, but not too much, to water the ground, and deploying a hoe, an edged weapon from a plant's perspective to drive back the weeds, all performed in view of passers-by who jeered at Thoreau's refusal to add manure. My goodness. He refused to add manure, which would require employing a bogger, that is a John Field. Once the beans. So is that what a bogger is? I didn't know what a bogger was. If you apply manure, does that make you a blogger or a bogger? Now I know what a blogger is. A bogger. Once the beans sprouted, the entanglements multiplied. My auxiliaries are the dews and rains to water this dry soil. Thoreau observed early in July, my enemies are worms, the cool days, and most of all woodchucks. Oh no, we're back to the woodchucks. I had conflicts with woodchucks. They have numbed for me and nibbled. They have nibbled for me and ate. See, they eat like they can eat like an acre or so. Here was an eighth of an acre. Eventually the beans would be too tough for woodchucks, but even then they will go forward to meet new foes. So what to do about the woodchuck? If they wrecked his bean crop, his experiment's economic foundation collapsed. Should he do what Alec Tureen did? Kill them and put the carcass in the cooking pot. Thoreau tried that. Once I went so far as to slaughter a woodchuck which ravished my bean field and devour him, partly for experiment's sake. He enjoyed it too, he admitted. But even if you had, quote, your woodchucks dressed out for the village butcher, unquote. That is by Peter Hutchinson. This didn't seem in the long run precisely, quote, a good practice. Thoreau's friends noticed he ate whatever was served, even meat, rather than make a fuss over their dinner table. But when he was alone, high on his new ethical platform, Thoreau fussed plenty. How could he eat animals without worrying? How could he eat animals without worrying about the ethics of eating animals? Don't you have to kill them to eat them?
If you do somebody else, you can.
But if somebody else kills them, you eat them.
It's the same thing.
Aren't you implicated as an accessory in the crime and get bad karma? Ethics of eating animals. How could he condemn savagery in others when he was predator himself? Question mark. Fishing, his favorite display of the harmonious integration of humans and nature, posed a real dilemma. He loved to fish, but did his, quote, mystical spiritual life, unquote, at the pond include killing to eat, even killing fish? Could he live on apples, nuts, and berries? Question mark. Are you able to?
Oh.
Are we able to? I'm able to live on apples, nuts, and berries. I love apples, nuts, and berries. Was his robust appetite for fish a sin or a sacrament? Do you think it was a sin at all? No. No. It's not a sin. Thoreau did not stop killing and eating fish, but he did start worrying about it. Quote, I find I cannot fish without falling a little in my own respect, unquote. He fretted in his journal. Quote, always I feel that it would have been better if I had not fished, unquote. Over the years, his worries evolved into the conflicted defense of vegetarianism and Walden's higher laws. He's remember the chapter on higher laws in his defense of vegetarianism. We're reading about plant-based diet and Henry David Thoreau and whether he's needed to employ a blogger about vegetarianism or a bogger to feed his beans. What do you think? Then there were the arrowheads that rattled against the blade of his hoe as he worked the furrows of his bean field. They told him that the corn he planted was seeding furrows originally opened by Indians, that in a real and literal way his act of creation was displacing even the memory of a people who had been violently forced off their homelands. On his breaks from hoeing beans, Thoreau meditated on the ruins and cellar holes of slaves and impoverished migrants who tried to rise to freedom but died out instead. While researching their lives, he uncovered narratives of abuse, exploitation, arson, and theft, as well as hope, determination, heroism, and at least temporary victories like Brister Friedman's Fine Orchard or Zilpah White's Defiant Independence. In the open and simplified setting of Walden Woods, not only was Thoreau more visible to himself as well as to his neighbors, but his neighbors were more visible to all his neighbors, non-human and human, past and future, as well as present. As the nature and extent of his relations dawned on him, his questions multiplied. This poor guy. He has to deal with non-humans, humans, the past, the future, oh my goodness. What are these pines and these birds about? What is this pond a-doing? I must know a little more and be forever ready. The elements are working their will in me. It seems that all nature came together to write his book. In short, Thoreau discovered that even this simple, stripped-down life offered no simple way to realize his utopian vision without some form of harm to others. Oh my God. There was no easy way to resolve the long history of conflict, struggle, and displacement evident everywhere in those woods with their deep and entangled human and natural history. He began to imagine a new role for himself, looking after, quote, the wild stock of the town, which, being part of the commons and owned by no one, had been neglected and ignored. And if he couldn't cure the woodchuck problem, he could at least work himself up to a state of reconciliation. Quote, these beans have results which are not harvested by me. Do they not grow for woodchucks partly? The thing is, you could tie some of the beans to the woodchucks. So he would lose a part of his crop to the woodchucks, but not all of it, I don't think.
Show me a woodchuck.
Oh dear, we used to have woodchucks eat the beans where I grew up.
How do they look?
Well, I'll show you a woodchuck.
Don't they live anymore?
Of course, there's what's still around woodchucks. They eat
like
about.
squirrels?
They eat about not really an acre. They eat like a.
Are they like squirrels?
They only eat like an eighth of an acre.
Are they like squirrels?
They're bigger, dear. They're much bigger. They're like a beaver or something. There was no word in Thoreau's lifetime for what we now call ecology, but his growing awareness was turning his thought far in advance of his time to ecological relationships in which humans participated but could not declare dominance, as well as to historical struggles and inequalities that laid the foundation for his political thinking on power and justice. We come to the end on page 205. We're dealing with Henry David Thoreau's woodchuck problem and what he should eat and his issues with fishing and just basically how to eat and whether he should have a blog or a bogger and reading and